I'm about to tell you something that goes against every piece of financial advice you've ever received, and it's going to make debt elimination enthusiasts absolutely furious. But the truth is, paying off your debt could be one of the biggest financial mistakes you'll ever make. And I'm going to prove it to you with mathematics that can't be argued. The entire debt payoff industry, from financial gurus to debt consolidation companies, has built their businesses on a fundamental lie that keeps people poor while making them feel virtuous about their financial decisions. They tell you that debt is bad, that you should pay it off as quickly as possible, and that being debt-free is the path to financial freedom. This advice is not just wrong, it's financially devastating for anyone who actually wants to build wealth. Here's what those debt experts don't want you to understand. Wealthy people use debt strategically to amplify their returns and accelerate their wealth building, while poor people pay off debt and wonder why they never get ahead financially. The difference isn't about moral virtue or financial discipline. It's about understanding how money actually works in the modern economy. The people who follow conventional debt payoff advice spend decades of their lives transferring their wealth to banks and missing opportunities to build real financial independence. Meanwhile, the people who understand how to use debt correctly build fortunes using other people's money, while the debt eliminators are still trying to pay off their mortgages. If you're ready to learn why the wealthy never pay off debt and how you can use the same strategies to build serious wealth instead of just feeling good about being debt-free, you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because what I'm going to reveal could completely change your financial trajectory if you have the courage to abandon conventional wisdom. Let me start by explaining the fundamental flaw in debt elimination thinking that keeps people trapped in middle-class poverty forever. The debt payoff mentality assumes that debt is inherently bad and that eliminating it should be a priority regardless of opportunity cost or alternative uses for your money. This assumption ignores basic principles of finance that wealthy people understand instinctively. Debt is not inherently good or bad. It's a tool, like a hammer or a computer. The value of the tool depends entirely on how it's used and what results it produces. When debt is used to acquire assets that generate returns exceeding the cost of the debt, it becomes a wealth multiplication tool. When debt is used to buy depreciating assets or consumption items, it becomes a wealth destroyer. The problem with conventional debt advice is that it treats all debt the same way, recommending elimination regardless of the type of debt, the interest rate, the tax implications, or the opportunity cost of using money for debt payoff instead of wealth-building investments. This one-size-fits-all approach prevents people from making optimal financial decisions based on their specific circumstances. Here's the mathematical reality that debt elimination advocates refuse to acknowledge. If you have debt at 4% interest and you can invest money at 8% returns, paying off the debt costs you 4% annually in opportunity cost. Over 20 or 30 years, this opportunity cost compounds into hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost wealth. But it gets worse when you factor in tax considerations. Mortgage interest is typically tax deductible, which reduces the effective cost of the debt below the stated interest rate. Investment returns are often taxed at favorable capital gains rates rather than ordinary income rates. When you consider these tax effects, the opportunity cost of debt payoff becomes even more expensive. The second fundamental flaw is that debt elimination advice ignores the wealth-building power of leverage. Leverage allows you to control larger amounts of assets with smaller amounts of capital, which amplifies your returns when investments perform well. Real estate investors, business owners, and sophisticated investors all use leverage to build wealth faster than would be possible using only their own money. When you pay off debt, you're essentially choosing to give up leverage and limit your wealth-building capacity to only what your personal savings can accomplish. This might feel safer psychologically, but it's mathematically inferior for building significant wealth over time. The wealthy understand that reasonable amounts of leverage, properly managed, allow them to participate in larger opportunities and generate higher total returns than debt-free strategies could ever achieve. They don't avoid debt, they optimize debt to maximize their wealth-building potential while managing risk appropriately. The third flaw is that debt payoff advice encourages a scarcity mindset that prevents people from seeing and pursuing the biggest wealth-building opportunities. When you're focused on eliminating debt, you become risk-averse and cash poor, which means you miss opportunities to invest in businesses, real estate deals, or other assets that could generate extraordinary returns. Opportunity cost is the hidden killer of wealth-building potential. Every dollar you use to pay off low-interest debt is a dollar that can't be invested in assets that could generate much higher returns. The compound effect of this opportunity cost over decades often exceeds the total amount of debt you're trying to eliminate. The fourth flaw is that debt elimination creates liquidity constraints that can actually increase your financial risk rather than reducing it. When you use all your available cash to pay off debt, you eliminate your financial flexibility to handle emergencies, invest in opportunities, or adapt to changing circumstances. Paradoxically, being debt-free with no cash reserves is often more financially risky than having some debt with substantial liquid investments. The debt-free person faces financial stress from any unexpected expense or income disruption, while the person with debt but liquid assets has multiple options for handling financial challenges. The fifth and most important flaw is that debt elimination advice completely ignores the inflation and currency debasement that systematically reduces the real cost of fixed-rate debt over time. In inflationary environments, debt becomes cheaper to service as wages and asset prices rise, while debt payments remain constant. This inflation effect means that debt contracted at today's dollars gets repaid with future dollars that are worth less due to inflation. The longer the debt term, the more beneficial this effect becomes. Wealthy people understand this dynamic and deliberately maintain long-term fixed-rate debt to benefit from inflation rather than paying off debt with today's more valuable dollars. When inflation runs at 4% annually, a 30-year mortgage gets repaid with dollars that are worth about 30% less in real terms by the time it's paid off. This inflation subsidy effectively reduces the real cost of the debt below the stated interest rate, making debt payoff even more expensive from an opportunity cost perspective. The sixth flaw is that debt payoff advice assumes that eliminating debt payments will free up money for investment, but in practice, most people who pay off debt simply increase their consumption rather than investing the freed up cash flow. This means they lose the wealth-building benefits of leverage without gaining the investment benefits they theoretically could achieve. The discipline required to aggressively pay off debt is the same discipline required for successful investing, but debt payoff provides immediate psychological gratification, while investing requires patience and delayed gratification. Most people who eliminate debt reward themselves with lifestyle upgrades rather than continuing the financial discipline that debt elimination required. Now let me show you exactly how wealthy people use debt strategically to build fortunes while everyone else is busy paying off their mortgages and wondering why they never get ahead. These strategies will shock you because they're the complete opposite of everything you've been taught about responsible financial management. The first strategy is mortgage optimization, where you maintain your mortgage indefinitely while investing the money you would have used for early payoff. Instead of paying off a 4% mortgage, you invest that money in dividend-paying stocks yielding 6 to 8%. The difference compounds over decades into millions of dollars. Here's a concrete example. You have a $300,000 mortgage at 4% with 25 years remaining. Paying it off early would require approximately $300,000. Instead, invest that money in dividend aristocrat stocks averaging 7% returns. After 25 years, you'd have over $1.6 million while still owning the home. The debt payoff approach leaves you with just the house. The second strategy is business debt leverage, where successful entrepreneurs use borrowed money to fund expansion rather than using their personal capital. This preserves personal liquidity for other opportunities while allowing business growth using other people's money. The business cash flow services the debt while building equity value that often exceeds the debt many times over. I know entrepreneurs who built $100 million businesses using primarily borrowed capital while maintaining personal wealth in liquid investments. When they eventually sold their businesses, they kept most of the proceeds because the businesses were built with debt rather than personal equity. The third strategy is real estate leverage, where investors use mortgages to control multiple properties rather than buying one property with cash. $1 million can control 5 properties with 20% down payments instead of one property purchased outright. The rental income from 5 properties typically exceeds the income from one property, while appreciation benefits are multiplied 5 times. Real estate leverage becomes even more powerful during inflationary periods when property values rise while mortgage payments remain fixed. Investors benefit from appreciation on the full property values while only having invested 20% of the purchase prices. The fourth strategy is tax optimization through strategic debt management. Mortgage interest, business debt interest, and investment debt interest are often tax deductible, reducing the effective cost of borrowing below stated interest rates. Meanwhile, investment gains are taxed at favorable capital gains rates rather than ordinary income rates. This tax arbitrage can turn 4% debt into 2% after tax cost, while generating 8% pre-tax returns that become 6% after tax returns. The net benefit of 4% annual arbitrage compounds into substantial wealth advantages over investment timelines. The key insight is that debt becomes more beneficial during periods of currency debasement and inflation, which is exactly the environment we're facing now. Fixed-rate debt gets cheaper to service over time while asset prices rise, creating automatic wealth building without any additional effort or risk. But using debt strategically requires understanding the difference between good debt and bad debt. Good debt is used to acquire assets that generate cash flow or appreciate in value. Bad debt is used for consumption or depreciating assets. The wealthy focus on accumulating good debt while eliminating bad debt. Good debt examples include mortgages on rental properties, business expansion loans, and margin debt used to buy dividend-paying stocks. Bad debt examples include credit cards for consumption, auto loans for depreciating vehicles, and personal loans for vacations or luxury items. The risk management approach for strategic debt use involves maintaining adequate cash reserves, diversifying income sources, and ensuring that debt service obligations can be met from multiple sources rather than depending on single income streams. Conservative debt ratios and fixed rate terms provide protection against interest rate volatility. Most importantly, strategic debt use requires emotional discipline to resist lifestyle inflation and maintain focus on wealth-building objectives rather than consumption gratification. The ability to service debt while continuing to invest and build assets separates successful wealth builders from people who get over-leveraged and face financial stress. The mathematical advantages of strategic debt use compound over time because leverage amplifies both returns and the benefits of inflation. A properly structured debt portfolio can generate wealth-building acceleration that pays off all debt from investment returns while maintaining the assets that generated those returns. This is why wealthy families maintain mortgages on properties worth tens of millions of dollars while having investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions. They understand that cheap money should never be repaid early when it can be invested at higher returns, and they structure their finances to optimize this arbitrage opportunity permanently. Now let me give you the exact implementation strategy for using debt strategically without making dangerous mistakes that could destroy your finances. Because while debt can be a powerful wealth-building tool, it can also be financially devastating if used incorrectly or emotionally. The first rule is never use debt for consumption or depreciating assets. Credit card debt for vacations, auto loans for expensive cars, personal loans for lifestyle upgrades, these are wealth destroyers that should be eliminated immediately. Strategic debt is only for acquiring appreciating assets or investments that generate returns exceeding the cost of borrowing. The second rule is maintain conservative debt to income ratios regardless of how much banks are willing to lend. Total debt service should never exceed 30% of gross income, and investment property debt should be supported by rental income rather than personal income. Banks will often approve much higher ratios, but conservative ratios provide safety margins for economic volatility. The third rule is always use fixed-rate debt for long-term strategic borrowing. Adjustable rate mortgages and variable interest business loans expose you to interest rate risk. that can destroy the mathematical advantages of leverage. Fixed rates allow you to lock in favorable borrowing costs and benefit from inflation, reducing the real cost of debt over time. For implementation, start by analyzing your current debt structure to identify which debts provide tax benefits and investment leverage versus which debts are purely consumptive. Focus on eliminating bad debt while optimizing good debt for maximum wealth building benefit. If you have a low interest rate mortgage, avoid early payoff and instead invest those funds in diversified dividend-paying stocks or real estate investment trusts. The goal is generating returns that exceed your mortgage rate while benefiting from tax deductions and inflation effects. For business owners, consider using debt to fund expansion or equipment purchases rather than depleting cash reserves. Business debt often provides tax benefits while preserving liquidity for other opportunities. The key is ensuring that business cash flow can service the debt independently of personal income. The biggest mistake people make is emotional decision-making around debt rather than mathematical analysis. Debt elimination feels psychologically satisfying, but it's often mathematically inferior to strategic debt management. Make decisions based on numbers and opportunity costs rather than emotions about being debt-free. However, there are specific situations where debt payoff does make sense. High interest rate credit card debt above 8 to 10% should typically be eliminated before implementing leverage strategies. Debt that creates emotional stress preventing good decision-making should also be addressed regardless of mathematical considerations. If you're within 5 years of retirement and want to reduce financial complexity, paying off mortgages might make sense for peace of mind even if it's not mathematically optimal. The psychological benefits of debt freedom can sometimes outweigh the financial costs for people who value simplicity over maximum returns. The key insight is that debt decisions should be strategic rather than emotional, based on your specific financial situation rather than generic advice. Wealthy people maintain debt throughout their lives because they understand how to use it profitably. Middle-class people pay off debt because they've been programmed to fear it rather than optimize it. If this approach resonates with you, start by calculating the opportunity cost of your current debt payoff plans. Compare the returns you could generate by investing instead of paying off low-interest debt. The mathematical reality might shock you into reconsidering your debt elimination strategy. Subscribe to this channel for more strategies that wealthy people use but rarely discuss publicly. Share this video with anyone who's been brainwashed into believing debt payoff is always the right financial strategy. Leave a comment and tell me whether you're going to reconsider your approach to debt management. Remember, the goal isn't to accumulate debt for its own sake. The goal is to use debt strategically as a tool for building wealth faster than would be possible using only your own capital. Master this concept, and you'll understand why the wealthy never pay off their mortgages while everyone else struggles to become debt-free.